And we're back to finish up chapter 7 about the global circulation. I know that I was drawing the Bermuda High. I don't know what I called it Bermuda High. It was like here was the east coast of the United States, here's Spain and stuff over here, and this big high pressure system was out in the ocean. And I showed how the circulation around that feeds warm, moist air up into the southeast. And so our summers, which judging by our latitude, we ought to be in the horse latitudes in the summer when Uncle Horse Latitudes comes up to visit for a while. I mean, the Mediterranean's dry in the summer, California's dry in the summer, lots of places at our latitude are, but we're not. Because this big high pressure system out in the Atlantic keeps feeding warm, moist air up. It gets over this hot land and hot Atlanta or whatever and heats it up and bubbles it up into thunderstorms. So we get rain in the summer after all. But why is this pressure so strong over the Atlantic in the summer? This pertains to page 186, which looks like this, where you've got a couple of maps of the global average pressure patterns. Now, the pressure is different every day. That's why you got a different weather map every day. But these are averages. And on average, there's some pretty high pressure out there in the summer. Now, why is it so strong? Because if you remember the way high and low pressure often get started, it's not the only reason for them. But when you have a cold surface, relatively cold compared to the surroundings, there shrinks down, puffs up over the warm places, and spills on top of the people where it's cold. So you tend to get high pressure when it's relatively cold. It doesn't actually have to be cold, but it has to be colder than the surroundings. And of course, in the summer, the land gets hot here, the land gets hot here, so you get this big old relatively cold high pressure over the ocean. And it feeds those warm, moist air overs. Okay, so you got that, but there's more of these weird seasonal pressure patterns. Let me think. You know just how I just said that cold surfaces tend to make high pressure? Oh my gosh, you ought to see what happens in Asia in winter. That was a summer picture. Looking at examples again of how these pressure patterns change with the seasons. But Asia is all big and all. You know, there's Asia, there's the Kamchatka Peninsula, and there's Korea or something, and then there's China and Japan's off here, and I probably didn't draw that very well. But anyway, in the winter, you get this super strong high pressure, the Siberian high. Why? Because it's land in the winter and it gets cold. It gets so cold that this thing just totally dominates, and the wind, clockwise, high north, spirals out of it like that and just makes this almost continuous flow out of, say, Mongolia across China to Japan. Now, let's see, Jenny, you might know about this. I can't remember exactly where you lived there. You might have told me. But in the winter, you're probably used to cold northwest winds bringing dry air in. Now, that same cold high pressure system in the summer, when the land gets hot, turns into a big low pressure system because it's relatively hot. And I need to draw some more down here. Let's go down. Let's do India. Well, I forgot some stuff. There's Vietnam and Malaysia and all that. And Australia. In fact, I'll even draw Australia in there. It's not very good Australia. It's terrible Australia. It's not that bad. Oh, Tasmania, New Zealand, whatever. Guinea, Borneo. I like geography. Anyway, so look what happens if you live in India. If you live, say, in New Delhi, about this time of year, end of March, it's starting to get warm. The highs are probably pushing 90 degrees about now, and the lows tonight probably getting down to the 60s and up about 90 in the daytime. It's pretty dry because all winter they've had this, cool air flowing in over the Himalayas. It's not really very cold anymore because it comes down off the Himalayas and gets compressed. But in any case, it's dry as a bone. It's been dry for like 6 months there. And as spring goes on, it'll get hotter and hotter and hotter. It'll get to where by sometime in May, high temperature is going to be getting up around 110 and only cooling down to like 80 at night or 85. It's just ridiculous. It gets so hot. But when it gets really, really hot, you know what that's going to do? It's going to make the air puff up and spill over and get lower pressure at the surface, and you'll replace the high with a big low. And then the Indian Ocean, not that it's exactly cool, but it's cooler than that. So then air is going to start flowing up from the southwest across India and bring loads of moisture. This is going to start in about the end of May, maybe June sometime. It kind of comes up in a wave. You know what this is called. It's called the monsoon. I don't know if you do it or not. If you read the book, you do. It's called the monsoon. Monsoon doesn't just mean a lot of rain. Monsoon means season. And that's what the seasons are, the wet season and the dry season. So it's kind of like in the summer, the land is kind of like the land at the beach is in the daytime. It's relatively hot and the water is relatively cool. And so high pressure over the water drives, air up over the land. So you get the sea breeze. This is a colossal seasonal sea breeze off the Indian Ocean. Of course, it may vary a little bit with day and night, I guess, but it's so massive it almost doesn't care what time of day it is. It just keeps on flowing. So in New Delhi, by July, it'll be like really warm, muggy, raining a lot. Mostly afternoon thunderstorms, but highs, like 93, and lows at night like 79, and a good chance of rain, just muggy, humid. Then, come September, the land will start to cool off. The winds will slow down, and about October, the rains end. And then you go back to the high pressure driving the dry air back down over the area. And so in the winter, New Delhi will be like lows in the 40s and highs about 70 and dry as a bone. And that's their seasonal season. It's called the monsoon. So monsoon is a big deal. Does anybody else got a monsoon? You kind of get one, say, in eastern China, because you do get, again, in the winter, the wind out of the northwest, and it's kind of dry and cold. But then in the summer, that same low pressure does draw air up off the western Pacific, and it gets warm and muggy and humid. The one time I've been there to Shanghai, I've also been to Tokyo. Both times it was warm and humid. Don't remember, it might have been, it wasn't much rain, but it often rains. Like in June, good bit of rain there. I think they call it the plum rains. Anyway, so the monsoon affects those areas. Look at northern Australia. Northern Australia is on the other end of this. When the wind is blowing this way in, what would that be, July maybe, they're dry. It's their winter down there south of the equator. That's not quite right. But anyway, they're south of the equator. It's fairly dry. But then when this same monsoon circulation comes out of the northwest in January, they get warm, moist air. So Darwin, Australia starts getting their rain. Anybody else get a monsoon? Yes. Who else gets a monsoon? Let's see. I mean, the big one, the Indian one is the big one. But Western Africa, the Sahara Desert gets so hot in the summer, it gets all low pressure and sucks all this warm air up. So places like Nigeria, for example, and up to Ouagadougou get rain as it flows up north, with the winds. And then that's their summer monsoon of rain. In the winter, I'm not saying it's exactly cool. It's not, because it's the Sahara Desert, but at least it's drier, very much drier, bone dry in the winter, such as it is. And yes, there is one more place I'm going to tell you that gets a monsoon. You probably never would believe it, but the people who live there know about it. Yeah, here's the western United States. There's Baja California. There's Mexico. And I can usually draw a better map than this. But anyway, there's California and, Nevada. And, God, better than that. Oh, shoot. Anyway, Arizona, New Mexico. You think they're dry. They're deserts, right? Well, they mostly are. And they get a little bit of winter rain sometimes. But mostly in the summer, they're dry. They're supposed to be dry in the summer because, Mediterranean climate. However, they get so hot in the summer, like 110 degrees in the afternoon or more. Phoenix, that area, popping up to like 110, gets strong low pressure. And this sucks air up over it. I remember being out there one time in the summer, and we saw some thunderstorms, and I don't think it rained. We saw them around. Anyway, they do get rain in the summer in July and August. That's pretty much it, because they get a temporary little monsoon. So now you heard about monsoons. Oh, let me think of a couple other pressure patterns I need to mention. Yeah. Okay. Let me say this. Up around, like I say, here's Alaska, you know, North America generally like that, and Hudson Bay, and I'm in such a hurry, I can't do a good job. Here's Greenland, there's Iceland. There's strong low pressure right here and right here on average in January. Well, first of all, it's the subpolar low, and it ought to be kind of low pressure, but it's extra low pressure in January. You might go like, wait a minute, January's colder. Doesn't that make high pressure? It's the temperature relative to what's around it. You see, it gets so cold over Canada and east and west of there that, relatively speaking, these places are a little bit on the warm side. I wouldn't jump in the water there in January, but it's relatively warm. So you get the Aleutian low and the Icelandic low. They're not permanent features, but they're areas where low pressure is frequent and passes through there a lot. So again, that's the subpolar low concentrating. Notice what happens here. It's the northern hemisphere that gets the weird seasonally changing pressure patterns. The southern hemisphere is kind of like predictable theoretical stuff because, can you think why? Yeah, take a look at a map. You'll see that the southern hemisphere is mostly water, and it's a fairly uniform surface, so these differences don't come into play. Northern hemisphere is about half land, half water to get this stuff. All right, so you got a mental picture now, I think, of the seasonal pressure patterns and the reasons for them and some themes that run through that. There's some other things that are super big to point out. Oh my gosh, this is one of the most important things you're going to learn. It's like probably in the top 10 anyway in the whole course. And that is a little truism you know about. You know, like, say you're worried it might rain, so you check the radar. If you see there's rain in Alabama, is it not rain in South Carolina? Does that mean we here in Georgia are going to get rain or not? Which way does the weather usually go? You know that it usually, I think you know this, it usually comes from the west. Not quite always, but like 90% of the time, maybe 80 or 90% of the time, weather patterns are coming out of the west toward the east, at least in the mid latitudes. Now, if you look down close to in the tropics, you'll see hurricanes will travel the other way. They'll travel from Africa across toward the Caribbean. But then if they ever get up over like North America, over U.S., they hook around and head back to the east, from the west toward the east. So we have westerlies. And these are upper level winds. Now, I've already talked about the surface westerlies that we're trying to keep the earth from stopping spinning. We talked about that. The upper level westerlies are what I want to talk about now. And there's a section of the book that says, why westerlies? And you need to know this. I'm probably going to ask you. I'm not quite sure I'm testing you yet, but you're going to need to know, why are there westerlies? And here it is. I've kind of already explained it. It's also explained fairly nicely on pages like, let's see, the good picture. In fact, there's a section called Why Westerlies on page 190. See that picture? You know what? I'm not going to try to draw it right now. I want you to look in your book at the picture. I might draw a little bit. Here's the basic idea. Oh, shoot. It's hard to draw. I'll try. Here's the Earth. Here's the equator. The equator gets more sunshine. Air puffs up tall. I've already talked about this. Air puffs up tall over the equator because it got heated. Since it's so tall, it's going to spill. And it's going to spill to the north in the northern hemisphere and the south in the southern. But it won't get far before the Coriolis effect grabs hold of it and turns it to its right in the northern hemisphere and its left in the southern hemisphere. So think about some air traveling. Now, this is like this air, but translated over here. So if this air tries to move north at high altitudes, like way up high where it's spilling off the tall air up here, it's going to get bent to the right. And it's soon going to become a westerly flow. That means from the west towards the east, high in the atmosphere, because the Coriolis force or effect bends it around. It's a geostrophic wind pretty much, because you pretty much got a balance between, the pressure gradient trying to drive it north. See the pressure gradient? Air's tall here, squashed down here. But you got the Coriolis effect trying to push it south, and so it goes this way. Try the southern hemisphere. send the wind down toward the pole here, where it's tall and piled up, it's going to get bent to the left. And oh my goodness, both hemispheres, same thing. In both hemispheres, the wind tries to blow at high altitudes from the west towards the east. If you go outside and look up in the sky at those high wispy clouds, cirrus clouds, you remember those? Cirrus clouds, cirrocumulus, all those things are way up high, are generally moving from the west toward the east anytime I've seen them. Maybe from the southwest, maybe from the northwest, but kind of from the west. They have a component from the west in any case. So that's the westerlies. Now, that tends to drive the air, the lower level things like high pressure systems, low pressure system, fronts, which you're going to learn about in another couple of chapters. It pushes them all off towards the east. That's why we in mid latitudes have this truism that the weather goes from west to east. Now, the thing is, let me tell you about rivers. I've seen them from airplanes a lot. Been to rivers too, but what I'm really talking about is a view from an airplane. I've crossed the Mississippi many times in airplanes. I'm one of those that looks out the window. Now, the Mississippi, in fact, let me draw a map of Mississippi. I'm not sure I'm getting every little kink and cranny just right, but basically, Mississippi has a messed up western border. Why'd they do that? Well, it's the river. The Mississippi does that. And I'm going to think, what a stupid way to get from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. Why didn't the Mississippi River just do the smart thing and go in a straight line? You might say, well, the land was all funny like that. Yeah, maybe it was, but you know how the land got funny like that? A lot of it was because the river itself is an interplay between the two. And besides, this land down here is pretty flat. So why is the river doing crazy zigs and zags? Well, if I understand right, I spent so much of my childhood playing down at the creek in my beautiful neighborhood, Newton Estates. The creek ran through my backyard, backed into my property. I would go down there and explore. I went all up and down that creek. Used to draw maps of that creek. I had an island in the creek I called Ariops Island because I thought that it looked like the kind of place that a Permian era proto-reptile amphibian thing called Ariops would crawl out of the water and bring life to land. Anyway, I remember that creek, and I remember it had bends in it. I remember something about those bends. Like, here's a bend in the creek, it's seen from above. I wish you were here so I could ask and see if you know these things, see if you ever played at the creek. But in any case, one side of the creek, say the creek's flowing this way, one side of the creek would have like a sharp cut off edge, like a cliff, not real high, but a cliff like thing. Tree roots would be poking out of it. It's kind of hollowed out looking like that. The other side was this big broad area of soft sandy mud that your feet would sink in and leave little puddles of water in your footprints, that kind of stuff. I hope I think about good memories. I've never seen these things. Anyway, which side is which? Can you guess? Which side has the steep thing and which side's all flat and muddy? Right, I guess. This is the mud and this is the cliff. And I think the reason is because the water, when it goes around a turn, smashes into the side of the cliff and digs away at it. Whereas the slow-flowing water on the inside of the turn swims slowly, lets the silt settle out, and builds up a layer of sandy mud. So it builds up sandy mud stuff. Look what you do. This process causes the curve to exacerbate, to go from being just a little bit curved to more and more curved until it just goes nuts. With a river like the Mississippi, in fact, you'll get like these wiggly things like that, and you'll get something like this, and it only gets worse and worse and worse until it's doing like this. Then one day, I don't know if it's just a day, but at some point, the river goes like, hey guys, what the heck are you doing all that for? How about just look at this? This is easy. Yay, look, you found a new way. And look what you did. You just stranded some river. There are actually, if I understand correctly, there are a lot of places where there's old river boats. I think this is true. old river boats sitting in the woods in Mississippi, like 2 miles, 4 miles or whatever from the Mississippi River, because they got left there when the river decided to take a different route. So there's this thing, it's called meanders. Meanders are where the river gets wiggling. And it goes through this process where it goes from being fairly straight to having bigger wiggles to where the wiggles get crazy big, and then the wiggles like cut off and leave chunks of wiggle, like circular things left over. Now, I'm not here to teach you about rivers. I don't really know that much about rivers unless they're in the atmosphere. Because there's a river in the atmosphere. I've just talked about the westerlies just a few minutes ago. And the westerlies vary in strength with how steep the pressure gradient is, and that's with how steep the temperature gradient is, the rate of change of temperature with position on the planet. And so wherever the temperature is changing rapidly on the ground, say in the mid-latitudes, you're going to get really strong upper level winds, and they tend to like concentrate into rivers in the air. Now, they don't have banks made of mud and trees growing in them. No, they just got banks made of other air. But nevertheless, it's like a river in the air. And that river in the air is called the jet stream. Now, actually, there's kind of usually sort of 2 jet streams in each hemisphere. Like in the northern hemisphere, I'll let this be the equator. There you go. There's the equator. You have a jet about here called the subtropical jet. It's not usually the strongest one. It can be strong sometimes, the subtropical jet. And there's another region of strong winds, usually a little stronger, called the polar jet. And the polar jet is in the rapidly changing temperature regime, getting close to the subpolar low. You might find it near, maybe just south of the subpolar low. So that's the polar jet. And you got them in both hemispheres, a subtropical and a polar jet. They're like rivers, so guess what they tend to do? They tend to meander. They vary in strength. You know what? Before I say that they meander, I'm going to talk about the variation in strength I just mentioned. I'm going to ask one of those questions. It's almost rhetorical because I can't hear you through the screen. But what time of year, what season do you imagine the jet stream being the strongest? What time of year is the jet stream the strongest? Summer, winter, fall, spring? What do you think? Right, winter. Guess I could have said wrong, but you said summer. But anyway, yeah, it's strongest in the winter for a very simple reason, an easy to understand reason. You know, the equator is about the same temperature all year. It never really has much of a summer or winter. You know, the equator is always hot. But the poles are, now they're always cold, but they're way colder in the winter than they are in the summer. For example, the equator is always around 80 Fahrenheit on average. The North Pole is like 35 Fahrenheit in July. And so there's only about that's that 45 degree, 45 degree temperature difference to drive that jet stream. But in the winter, it's about minus 35 Fahrenheit. So that's like 115 degrees. Whoa, it's a big steep temperature gradient, big steep pressure gradient. The jet stream gets way stronger in the winter. This is why winter weather changes quickly. It's being driven by fast winds. How fast? Frequently over 100 miles per hour. Occasionally, the jet stream can reach speeds of around 200 miles per hour. And if it's dragging weather patterns along, you can see how some kind of weather could get across the country pretty quickly. In fact, they call it jet stream because jets fly up there. It was really kind of discovered, if I understand right, in World War II, when airplanes like bombers would be trying to fly, say, westward. They'd be flying like an airspeed of 200 or 300 miles an hour and look down, they're barely moving because the wind was blowing so hard there. So anyway, we got these jet streams. They're stronger in the winter than they are in the summer in each hemisphere. But they meander, and they meander a lot. Sometimes they'll be going like that, kind of straight like that. But then they'll get more and more bent. They'll get a kink in them like this. And then the kink gets bigger. Whoa. And sometimes the kink gets so bad that it all cuts off and goes back to normal again. Oops, can't do that. Yeah, like that. Kind of like your creek does or like the Mississippi River does. Now I'm going to draw a top view that's really pretty much illustrated in your book anyway. But let's say this is the Earth, but these views of the Earth are looking at the North Pole in the middle. So imagine this is the North Pole in the middle. And we'll do this in order like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a sequence of pictures. And the book has pretty much the same sequence of pictures. But in any case, so generally speaking, let's say we start with a jet stream that's going like this. Like that. That's the direction it blows. That's towards the east from the west, the westerlies. But then it starts getting kind of kinky. And typically, it'll have 4, 5, 6, something like that, kinks in it. Waves going around the whole world. Then it gets bad messed up. The kinks get, like, some cases huge like that, you know, crazy stuff. Okay, I guess I got that right. And then, next picture, some of them, there's one at least, got pinched off. And the rest of them, maybe another piece got pinched off here. And the rest of it kind of goes back to like that again, which is almost back to picture 1 with a couple of dying eddies. An eddy is a swirly. You'll leave this stranded, closed off, low pressure system of rotating air in the atmosphere just going off to die somewhere. And I remember one April we got in one of those things. It was like this, you know, here we are. The jet stream got a pretty big kink in it, like that. And that big old kink in the jet stream made us get cold for April. It was unusually cold for April. And then the kink got worse, and it got like, whoa, like that. And then it totally cut off, and we were stranded for about 4 days in this swirling mass of cool, rainy air. It was like gloomy and cloudy. It was in the 40s for like 4 days. Maybe it warmed up to the 50s by the end of that time. Chicago was 70. They were up here in another part of the jet stream. So this is the pattern it goes through. Now, the weather sometimes is boring and sometimes is exciting. I wonder if you can guess when the weather is boring and when it is exciting in these pictures. Boring. This one here, you know, it's like maybe it's partly cloudy, maybe it's kind of a medium, mildish, warm temperature, maybe there's a sprinkle, nothing exciting. Then it starts to get a little more interesting. Here, when this stuff's going on, some people are way warmer than normal. Some people are way colder than normal. Then some people go from way warmer to way colder, or from way colder to way warmer, and it's stormy and everything. And so the weather gets exciting in various places in the world for like a few days, and then it's kind of like, did its job. What's its job? You remember, to enforce thermal socialism. The whole idea is steal from the heat and give to the cold, vice versa. Look what this does. When the jet stream gets all these big kinks in it, it causes pools of cold air to everywhere inside this polar vortex. Everywhere inside it's kind of cold. And you see what it managed to do? It delivered coldness to rather low latitudes and warmness, see these warmnesses, to rather high latitudes. It smeared everything up. Its whole job was kind of to smear it all up, stir it all up, and make temperatures a little more the same than they were. Then, of course, what happens over time, after that settles down, the differences are reestablished, and then the meanders get going again, and it all happens again. So that's the whole story of like waves and the westerlies. Now, there's a little bit more left in here. Oh, okay. There was a thing about global winds and ocean currents. Well, I've kind of shown this in a way, and you've seen it 2 or 3 times, the ocean currents. Each ocean has a big high pressure system over it, which is part of the subtropical high. And the equator, near the equator, you've got the trade winds blowing in from both directions, so that you drive water towards the west in the tropics, and then the water turns around and heads back towards the east at high latitudes and makes these giant gyres or circulation cells. You can see them there. Hopefully you're looking at your own book too. And so that's why we get the Gulf Stream and the Canaries current. It's cold, and the California current, the Kurosha current that goes up past Japan. And similar currents in the southern hemisphere. Hannah, you from South Africa, and South Africa has, on the west part of South Africa, has a cold ocean current. And on the east coast, it has a warm ocean current. So over here at Durban, it rains more in the summer than it does, say, at Cape Town or something. And in any case, so the ocean circulation is driven by that. There's also, I'll let you read it, the thing about upwelling, which is why the water off San Francisco is super duper cold. Now I go about another 4 or 5 minutes here with one more thing. You've probably heard of, I don't know if you've heard of it, probably have heard of a weather thing. They talk about it a lot. Some people talk about it more than others, depending on where you live. Called El Nino. See, I even used the tilde over the end, Nino. Okay, so El Nino. First question. The little boy. What little boy is El Nino? It's Jesus. I'm not even kidding. This is a weather pattern named after Jesus. Why? Because it originally was thought to happen mainly around Christmas. Where? Somewhere where they speak Spanish. Where's that? Peru. So it's like this. You had here's the equator, and here's South America. South America goes like that. And let's say Australia's over here somewhere. That's not the scale, but Anyway, so here's the deal. Generally speaking, in Peru, it's usually cool. Surprising. They're near the equator. Why are they cool? Oh, I think it's called the Humboldt current. Anyway, it's the Peruvian current, you could call it. The Humboldt's over there. The Peru current comes up like this, and it makes them kind of cold. Kind of weird, huh? It's part of the circulation around counterclockwise, high south, pushes the water along with it. So it's relatively cool there. Since it's cool, it stabilizes the atmosphere. It doesn't rain much. So it's dry. Though it is kind of foggy a lot, it doesn't really rain. Kind of like the California coast. There's another good thing about it. When this water takes a turn and heads offshore, it like sucks water up off the bottom of the sea. What's on the bottom of the sea? Dead stuff that's good to eat. Good for who to eat? Fish, which are good for us to eat, I guess you could say. So anyway, the fishing is great. So Peru, foggy and cool and not much rain, very little rain, but the fishing's good. And they live off that, But around Christmas, a lot of years around Christmas, for a couple of weeks, the whole thing falls apart. And it goes the wrong way for a little bit. And all this warm water washes up on shore, and the fish don't have anything to eat, and the fishing gets bad, and it starts raining, and mudslides come down the side of the mountain and everything. And it's like, dang it, I hate this stuff. For just a couple of weeks around Christmas, and so they named it after Jesus and said, oh, question.
What's the difference between an El Nino and an El Niña?
La Nina?
La Nina.
You are going to learn that. Thank you for that question. You are about to find out. And so here's what El Nino is. El Nino is El Nino on steroids. You see, most years it's just like for a couple weeks in December. It's no big deal. The fishing is good again. Sometimes it goes haywire, though. It goes crazy. Sometimes the whole ocean current starts flowing the wrong way and washes all this, and the fishing's bad for a whole year, and there's mudslides for a year, and they don't like it. Now, what happens on the other side of the Pacific, they don't like either, because they're getting a cool ocean current. You might think down in Australia and Indonesia, they like the cool ocean current. Not so much, because it cools the air down, makes high pressure, and the high pressure makes drought. So when you get the mud and bad fishing in Peru and rain, you're getting drought and bushfires, wildfires in Australia, big dust storms and stuff like that. They don't like El Nino. They don't like it one bit. But then there's the opposite. La Nina.
La Nina.
Now, La Nina is a weird name because it doesn't refer to any particular girl. That's an actual boy. But no, it's not any particular girl. It's just the opposite. So what do you call it when it goes haywire in the other direction? What do you call it when you get really, really strong trade winds and the ocean's really going that way a lot? And, and then they get super good fishing and real dry. And over here, it rains a lot in Australia. That's La Nina. It's a big southern oscillation. Now I got to tell you, well, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. When I got to Australia back in 1992, they had something waiting for me at the school, at the Pittwater House School. Sorry, our student isn't here to hear this anymore. Did I tell him? I can't remember. They had this mysterious object that had washed up on the beach. It was a styrofoam thing with wires hanging out. It mysteriously washed up on the beach. They thought it looked like something I'd be interested in, so they showed it to me. I pretty much knew what it was. It was a drop sonde. A drop sonde is the thing you drop out of an airplane. It comes down like those little twirly things, from the trees, like that. And it has instruments on it, record stuff. But what's it doing there? Besides, on it, it had a label that said, if found, please return to blah, 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 blah. Baseline Drive, Boulder, Colorado. What the heck is the little styrofoam thingy doing on the beach in Sydney from Boulder, Colorado? And they're supposed to return it. I took it down to Bureau of Meteorology, which was right next door to a McDonald's with a big player piano. Do you remember the big player piano? Remember the big player piano when the McDonald's took in there? Yeah. And I went in and hung out with these blokes for 2 hours, and they didn't have any of the weather. The weather there was just fine. They didn't care. So they talked to me, and it wasn't theirs. A year later, I found myself in Boulder, Colorado, and I tried to hunt down the place. And I did find out where it came from. The reason it was in Sydney was because they were doing this thing studying El Nino, and they had flown airplanes. It's called Toga Core, and they flew airplanes and dropped these things into the ocean to study the weather and then maybe even the ocean currents. I'm not sure if they kept track of them. It followed the ocean currents from the middle of the Pacific down to Sydney and washed up, and I got to see it. There's my story. Let me see if there's anything left in this chapter. I've talked about El Nino, and you know what? There's more in the book about what El Nino could do to us, and then that's about it. This has been the longest video I've made yet. Thanks for watching. And that's it for chapter 7. Please do the homework.